The rights of every man diminish when the right of one man is threatened. Justice Siddharth Mridul had said this way back in 2021 while appearing on a webinar. A judge who has never minced his words when dealing with a case of personal liberty or free speech. Justice Mridul, after about 15 years of an illustrious journey on the bench at the Delhi High Court, was elevated as the Chief Justice of the Manipur High Court, but not at a time when everything was hunky-dory in the state. The state was going through a lot of conflict and violence. Thank you so much, Justice Mridul, for being with us
Always
in this
a pleasure.
Bar Mentions interview series. How do you look back, sir, at your journey on the bench? Was it fulfilling?
In one word, fondly. It was productive for the most part. There are, of course, parts of my stint as a judge which I'd like to forget. But, and I have forgotten most of the negative aspects of being a judge. How circumscribed you feel on occasion, particularly when it comes to expressing yourself freely. But on the whole, it's been a wonderful journey.
Now you have to elaborate. What were the negative aspects?
Well, the negative aspects are that as a judge, you do not have the freedom of choice in relation to what you'd like to hear.
Okay.
You know, I'll give you an example even of late. One of my former colleagues and a comrade in arms, Dr. S. Muralidhar, was arguing an appeal in relation to the bomb blast that took place in Bombay.
Right.
And he was appearing for one of the convicts. I called him and I said, I so envy you because that's what I'd like to do. Go and represent convicts who are facing death sentences. And so similarly, something akin to that, when you're on the bench, the kind of matters you want to hear are not the ones that are always listed before you.
Yeah, right.
So in that sense, you rely on your colleagues to hear those matters and determine them.
Okay.
And the matters which really leave an indelible mark on you are few and far between.
Okay.
Of course, the frequency of those issues that interest you increases as you spend more time on the bench, because most significant matters raising relevant issues that are current and relevant come before you only as you attain seniority on the bench.
Okay.
But the first couple of years you do matters in disciplines of the law that you may have had no interest in and you would have had no experience in,
Right.
for the most part.
Right.
So, from the standpoint that you get an opportunity to examine every law at some length, you do a deep dive into every legislation.
Right.
But there are some legislations and certain kind of matters that you prefer instinctively and naturally.
Okay.
So for me, I have always been deeply attached to human rights.
Right.
So those are the matters that came my way much later in my tenure, and I believe those are the matters that I remember most fondly, regardless of the decision.
But you just said that it was not your choosing. Why did you say that?
Well, the fact is that initially when the collegium was kind enough to consider me for elevation, I had been designated by them, and I was not very keen to assume the role of a judge. There is some history to it. My father was a judge of the Bombay High Court in the 70s, and he was on the bench for precisely a little over 2 years, I think, before he quit and shifted to the Supreme Court to join the bar once again. So I had my reservations about being on the bench, and I did know that it curbs your natural instincts. You are required to conform to
Judicial discipline.
not just, of course you have to conform to judicial discipline, but you also have to conform in other ways. Like I said, you can't express yourself freely. The saying is that you have to run like a horse and live like a hermit. That's not an issue. The issue is that you have to be circumscribed about everything that you can say on most current issues as well.
Right.
Yeah. So that was not something I was particularly comfortable doing.
Like you're saying that the aspect that which is often said that judges should detach themselves from the society,
Right.
that is not something that you were.
Right. So I can practice detachment, but I cannot practice apathy and indifference. There's something that happens around you on a regular basis, and you can't express an opinion on it because it might come up before you
Right.
as a judge.
Right.
So there are certain self-imposed restrictions that you have to strictly adhere to. And I've always been somebody, as you pointed out, for free speech and plain speaking.
Just taking a leaf from what you said about your father, but there's also another aspect to it. Like after your father's, I think, sudden demise,
Right.
you had to bear the family's responsibilities very early on in life. So you had siblings to take care of, if I'm not wrong. So how did this hardship shape you for the future that you stepped into?
Well, the fact is that all of a sudden reality hits you. You know, so long as you have somebody in the family who is protecting you from the world and looking after all your needs, you don't think in terms of putting food on the table. But when all of a sudden the only breadwinner in the family passes away, and that too at a very young age. My father passed away, he was 54. And you're not prepared
To deal with it.
to deal with it. You know, you're not prepared to. It takes time to come to terms with the big bad world outside. But it's something you have to do, and a large number of people have done it. You know, large number of people have lost their parents at a young age, and all of us have had to reinvent ourselves and go back to the drawing board and learn about life the hard way. But it cuts both ways, right? If my father hadn't passed away, which would have been a wonderful thing if he had still been with me, I possibly wouldn't have experienced the grind and experienced how the vicissitudes of life, right? And possibly I wouldn't have been quite the man, the person I became. So when you're thrown into the deep end, you learn how to swim quicker.
That's what happened with you.
That's what happened with me, and I have no regrets about that. Of course, I sorely miss my father even today, and he was my role model, the only ideal I've had, honestly. So I still miss him dearly every day, like I said. But it taught me about life, and it taught me well. I can tell you that.
Right.
Yeah.
Before I get on to your judicial journey, before your elevation, you were a very active member of the Delhi Bar Council.
That's
right?
correct.
You held several posts, etc. How do you think the council is faring now? My question is important because these protests that keep happening every now and then in the Delhi Bar Councils, and do you think there is any scope for improvement in this entire structure that is present in Delhi across all courts?
See, there's always scope for improvement in every institution, in every body.
But what is it that is stopping it?
I believe the Bar Council, which is a statutory body of which I was an elected member, they seem to have forgotten the purpose behind their being set up.
Right.
The Bar Council was set up to not just secure and protect the interests of lawyers, it was also required to discipline lawyers and to instruct them on how to conduct themselves.
Right.
So I believe with the passage of time, it hasn't happened. I think we've lost sight of why the council and the bar associations were set up. We seem to have lost sight of that. We have digressed to doing things which are not strictly within the domain of the bar association. The bar association, since it represents the large body of lawyers, is required to act, if I may use the expression, as a check on the judiciary as well. Right?
Right.
And we principally as judges would rather that we faced just criticism from the bar, because eventually it is the bar which judges. That doesn't seem to be happening very often. We've reduced our role as lawyers to just transacting professional work. Our approach is not to make sure that the purity of thought that is at the very core of this noble profession. We seem to have deviated from that.
Okay.
Right. It's all about business now. It's not about running a tight ship and doing a good job and making sure that that people who are the very basis for our being here, the citizen is looked after. The small man is protected.
Negative point.
So we lawyers, we don't seem to be doing that today.
So that's what is wrong according to you.
That's what is wrong with the legal profession today, according to me. So I always say this, that lawyers are doing exceedingly well financially,
Right.
but the profession as a whole isn't doing well. The profession isn't doing well. The profession isn't, legal professionals are today far more mercenary in their approach than they used to be when I joined the bar. And of course, the previous generations of lawyers were vastly different.
Right.
When they were far more committed to the greater good, which doesn't seem to be the case today.
As you said, now it's just about business.
It's a business today.
After about 15 years as a Delhi High Court judge, you took charge as the
Almost
Chief Justice.
16.
Almost 16. Okay, I stand corrected. After almost 16 years as a judge of the Delhi High Court, you took charge as the Chief Justice of the Manipur High Court.
Right.
At a time when the state was burning, if I'm not wrong, what measures did the High Court take to ensure that the state authorities were, were keeping the peace? And also one connected question, sir, is that you had said that, it was not primarily the judgment which had led to the violence in Manipur. There was already simmering discontent in the state, which kind
Correct.
of, had a trigger point through the judgment. If you could just elaborate on that bit, and also the aspect that how did you ensure that
So
peace?
the differences that led to the ethnic strife in Manipur have been there for a very long time.
Okay.
There have always been differences between the hill tribes and the plains people in Manipur, owing to a number of factors.
Okay.
The hill tribes are all categorized as scheduled tribes.
Right.
So they have certain benefits which, of course, the plains people do not have because they fall in the general category. In terms of jobs, employment, and employment with the state, with the public bodies. So that's one of the issue. The other issue has been with regard to the ownership of land in the hills. Manipur, geographically, less than 10% of the land in Manipur is the plains. It is inhabited by the Meiteis by and large. Of course, the other tribes also live in the plains. So the Meiteis, who comprise almost 50% of the population, live in a land area which is less than 10%. And they can't acquire land in the hills. On the other hand, the cookies who are just about, if I'm not mistaken, 14-15%, right, maybe even less, can acquire land not just in the hills but in the plains as well.
Okay.
So that has been a sore point, the bone of contention between the plains people and the hill people.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons that Manipur has been long simmering with discontent. The judgment that you are alluding to, which directed the government to consider according scheduled tribe status to the Meiteis, was the match that lit that powder keg, right?
Because already the
And
land issue was too big a conflict.
land is a conflict. Being a part of a scheduled tribe or not is a conflict. Because Manipur, unfortunately, does not have industry.
Okay.
So the employment is limited.
Okay.
You can either be employed by the government, right, or public sector undertakings, or nationalized banks, or universities, or hospitals, which are run by the government. So employment is an issue, survival is an issue,
Okay.
and besides Manipur, unfortunately, there's double jeopardy because there's also very high hyperinflation in Manipur.
Okay.
Most the bare necessities have to be flown into Manipur from other states, making them frightfully expensive. So it's a double whammy. They don't have enough money, and on the other hand, everything is very expensive.
So that was.
So that all of this is part of which has given, unfortunately, given rise to the situation that obtains in
Yeah.
Manipur today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you ensure that the peace returns to the valley?
I haven't ensured that. I mean, I fervently wish and pray that peace returns to the valley. We did whatever we could, and we ensured that the executive was constantly reminded to uphold the rule of law
Right.
and make sure that ordinary people went about their lives in a safe and secure environment.
What was the government's response to the orders passed by the court, and were the orders really followed in letter and spirit? When you look back now, do you think it was followed in letter and spirit?
See, letter and spirit, the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. The fact is that our orders were to make sure that they would restore law and order, and that the rule of law was de rigueur. But that didn't happen. So evidently, for reasons best known to the executive, they were either unable to come to terms with the sporadic violence that erupted and continues to erupt in Manipur.
Yeah.
Either they were, it was beyond their capability to do that. Because I do not believe that, I'm not absolutely certain, and I don't think I should comment on it whether it was deliberate or whether it was just the attitude was cavalier.
Okay.
But the fact is, the end result is that they were unable to restore peace and maintain law and order.
Right.
So in that sense, I can't say that they complied with our directions in toto.
There were gaps.
There were large gaps.
Large gaps, okay. Your elevation as the Chief Justice of Manipur High Court was delayed for months. Some media reports also suggested that it was because the state government had held up your appointment. Why do you think that was, and is there any truth to this matter now?
I'm not. The fact that it was delayed, I was recommended to be elevated as Chief Justice of the High Court of Manipur, if I remember correctly, on the 4th of July.
Right.
Of 2023. And eventually I assumed office only on the 20th of October of the same year. So there was a delay. I wouldn't hazard a guess on why, who sat on my file and for what reason. I don't wish to get into that.
Do you think the
In
delay?
any case, I'm not privy to it.
But do you think the delay was considerably less now when you look back, considering there are other large delays that the government
No,
is.
there was a delay, and I was very keen to assume my office. So, but how it happened and why it happened, I am not privy to, and it did not affect my functioning at all, not in the least.
You continue to do your.
Absolutely, we have to insulate ourselves from
Right.
the political process and from the executive action or inaction. We've got to continue to do our jobs.
But didn't you try to get back to the reasoning now when you're out of the fold?
Not necessary.
No.
It's water under the bridge. Not necessary.
At the Delhi High Court, you headed a bench that granted bail to Devangana Kalita, Natasha Narwal and Asif Iqbal Tanha in the Delhi riots case in June 2021. The bench also made some remarks calling into question the probe into the riots. In October 2022, again a bench headed by you denied bail to Umar Khalid.
Right.
What changed?
Well, Umar Khalid, I believe, is still sub judice.
Yeah, it is.
So I will not comment on Umar Khalid.
But what changed in the High Court? What changed in your...
So you must understand, I mean, I'm sure you do, that every case is necessarily determined in the facts and circumstances antecedent and attendant. So the roles ascribed to the applicants before you, particularly in this case, now that you mention it, were vastly different. The roles ascribed to Devangana Kalita, Natasha Narwal and Asif Iqbal Tanha were very different
Than that of
from the
Khalid.
role assigned to Umar Khalid in the charge sheet.
Okay.
And you must understand that both these matters came up before us immediately post the Northeast Delhi riots. So, although the charge sheet had been filed, it was a very elaborate charge sheet containing allegations against these two different sets of people. And the allegations were not the same.
Okay.
The allegations against Mr. Khalid were, if I remember correctly, different. The role ascribed to him was different.
Okay. Umar Khalid and over a dozen other accused have been in jail for over 5 years now and in the Delhi riots cases. And the trial hasn't even started.
Right.
Why do you think that is, firstly? As a lawyer, if you can
Why
ask.
do I think the trial hasn't started?
Yes.
Well, I can't comment on that. But I can tell you this, that the Supreme Court has subsequently, in a number of matters, including the path-breaking judgment in
Najib.
said that you cannot be incarcerated without being convicted when the trial will take indefinitely long. And the Supreme Court has, in those cases, enlarged the accused, the under trials, on bail.
Right.
But it is not for me anymore to determine their applications.
Would you
Of course, as a lawyer, I would argue that they ought to be released.
Would you appear for Mr. Khalid now?
I don't believe I can.
You can. You cannot.
I
Because
cannot.
you decided the case. Okay, yes. And why are courts reluctant to grant bail to the accused even after 5 years? You think this question is answered by the
I
Najib
don't
judgment?
think they are reluctant to grant bail to the under trials after 5 years. I don't think they are. I think in the recent past, if you look at all the judgments in the past year or so, in most of these matters, the courts have come down very heavily on keeping somebody in judicial custody without expediting trial
Right.
as an under trial, right? And they have said so on a number of occasions. You will find any number of cases where they've been directed to be released in the past year.
Okay.
Number of cases.
I think Justice Oak's judgment was
Not just Justice Oak's judgment. I think a large number of benches, Supreme Court benches, have been. I think they have taken the view, and I completely subscribe to it, that don't unnecessarily incarcerate a man unless you establish his guilt. So there shouldn't be any pre-conviction detention for long periods of time. During the stage of investigation, it is understandable.
Okay.
See, you look at the triple test. right? But beyond that, if the trial is delayed for reasons completely beyond the control of the accused, my sense is that you should not. The courts are loath to incarcerate them indefinitely.
Do you think the stringent bail conditions under the UAPA and the Prevention of Money Laundering Act should be relaxed?
Well, I can't legislate. The courts cannot legislate. Right? 43D5 is what it is. Now, whether I agree with the stringent conditions that 43D5 imposes, right, under the UAPA is a different matter.
Do you agree with it?
I may not agree with the provision, but it is not for me to question that provision in my previous avatar as a judge.
No, I'm asking
Because-
now.
If you ask me, I do not agree with that provision. I do not agree with.
Now you can speak freely.
Of course I can. That's precisely the reason why I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
I couldn't have given you this interview while I was still on the bench. So the fact is that my sense is that it is harsh.
Yeah.
That's my belief. It is harsh.
But the counter argument is that the prevention of money laundering is such a grave offense that such a condition has to be there.
Right. So I believe that
Is it proportional, you feel?
both UAPA and PMLA or any of these special enactments relating to economic crimes and crimes against the state. See, we have had laws earlier, including TADA and NISA,
Right.
where the conditions imposed on grant of bail were equally onerous. It was virtually impossible for the accused to obtain bail, to get enlarged on bail. Two views are possible, but speaking for myself, I think they are a little too stringent. And which is why the courts have now begun to interpret it a little differently than they did when in Ghulam Mohammad Bhatt's case,
Right.
Zahoor Ahmad Watali's case. So we have moved on since then. And the courts have started taking a slightly different view.
Absolutely. And even in the Senthil Balaji case, if
Right.
I'm not wrong, that
Right.
was there. You know why your answers become more important is because you really have the experience of both bar and the bench. And when you talk about 43D5 and when you say that it's a stringent condition, of course now you're speaking as a senior lawyer.
Right.
But when you're on the bench, right, deciding a case
Right.
within the contours of law, how difficult is it to keep out your personal perception of a legislation and just look at it at the lens of, you know, what's
No, it's
happening
not
in front
just
of you?
difficult, it's absolutely necessary.
But does it
Till the
happen that it
time-
creeps into sometimes your judgments or reasonings?
The
Your own-
entire purpose would be defeated. The entire purpose of our taking an oath of office would be completely defeated if we were to interpret the law contrary to its very letter and spirit. So till the time that a legislation is found to be ultra vires the constitution,
No, I am not on.
we have no choice but to give it the intent, the scope and ambit.
Absolutely. I am not on the letter and spirit part
Yeah.
of the legislation. My question is when you're deciding a case and on a provision, as a judge, you have to interpret the provision, right? As a constitutional court judge,
Right.
that is the duty of the judge.
We have interpreted it.
Yes. So now I'm asking you, when you interpret a provision, is it only confined to the arguments made by the lawyers before you, or sometimes your, belief or perception of a section also creeps into the judgment? Not necessarily yours. I'm talking about,
So
the way.
you take a considered call on how you interpret every provision of every enactment that is a part of a case before you. And we took a view. I think Devangana, Kalita,
Yes,
Natasha,
you
Narwal,
did.
we did take a view.
Yes.
And that view, if I am not mistaken, the challenge against that view was eventually dismissed. So that view, as far as the courts are concerned, at least the Delhi High Court, has attained finality.
The Delhi High Court was criticized for not granting bail to the political opposition in the Delhi liquor policy cases. What is your take on how that was handled?
I
at that
have
point of
no
time?
idea. I don't believe that case was listed before me.
It was not.
I haven't.
But you must have read about it.
You'll be surprised to know that I don't read the newspapers.
Okay.
And for the most part of my tenure as a judge, I did not follow the media or read any.
But didn't it intrigue you why was the bail denied?
Not at all, because
Your hands
the
were full.
liquor scam had nothing to do with me.
Okay.
Absolutely nothing. And I had no interest in making myself aware or keeping myself up to date on what was happening. So I'm completely unaware of what the case was and who were the persons charged and why they were dealt with in the manner in which they must have been dealt with. I have no idea.
Right. You were very well known among the bar and your colleagues on the bench for your love for the Urdu language
Right,
and shayaris.
right.
We've heard you recite Ghalib and Faraz during court proceedings as well. Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia has also given a landmark judgment very recently that languages should not be
Right.
the factor that divides people. Where does that love come from? What is your favorite shayari, if you could just share with all of us?
Well, the fact is, I'm a Delhi wala, and Delhi gave birth to Rekta, which eventually metamorphosed into
Jashnere.
Urdu.
Aha.
So, this city gave birth to that language, and I became familiar with Urdu shayari and Farsi shayari because of my maternal grandmother, who could speak, read and write both languages. And when I was younger, I didn't quite follow. But with the passage of time, my love for Urdu poetry grew.
Right.
And since you mentioned Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia having quoted a sher in one of his judgments, I quoted a sher in one of my judgments. Janabe Kaif Bhopali was the शायर. He wrote, जनाबे कैफ ये दिल्ली है मीरो गालिब की, यहाँ किसी की तरफदारियाँ नहीं चलती. Do you follow Urdu?
Yeah.
Right. So I said so in one of my judgments. This was almost 10
But is
years
there any
ago.
shayari that sums up your judicial career?
My judicial career?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't quite thought about it, but I'll try and think of a sher that sums up my judicial career. Well, I quoted one, I think a couple of months before I was recommended to go to Manipur as Chief Justice. And that's a sher by Ustad Ibrahim Zauq. इन दिनों गर्चे दक्कन में है बड़ी कदरे सुखन, कौन जाए ज़ौक़ पर दिल्ली की गलियां छोड़कर.
This you have to explain us.
Well, so what happened was that immediately post the first war of independence in 1857, all the court poets were invited to join the court in Hyderabad.
Right.
By the Nizam of Hyderabad. So all including Ustad Ibrahim Zauq, who was the court poet for the Mughals, for Bahadur Shah Zafar. So he said, in dino garche, means that nowadays everybody who is of note is being invited to go to Dakkan. Dakkan is Hyderabad.
Okay.
Right? In this sher, Dakkan is Hyderabad. In dino garche, Dakkan mein hai badi katre sukhan, that every poet is being invited to go and join the court of the Nizam. Right? Kaun joy zauq par Dilli ki galiyan chhodkar. But who would want to leave Delhi?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that was that sums up your
Yeah.
judicial career according.
So which is why I'm here. Which is why I'm back here.
But thank you so much, sir, for speaking with us.
Pleasure is
It was a
mine.
pleasure interviewing you.
Pleasure
Thank you
is
so
mine.
much, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.